We're going to be looking at another fairly simple new feature in C# 9 this week, but another one that I think I'm going to be using quite a lot. And that's the thing that has a slightly weird name of fit and finish. And it's all about how we declare and create variables of different types. So before we look at the final result of this, let's take a quick look at the history of it, because if we go right back to the beginning of C# version 1, then the way that you declared a variable was something like this. So I could say something like person, and then just get that from the library. P equals new person. And then we haven't done in this class an overload. So let's just call Fred for the name. And so that's how we declare it. And you immediately see whenever you write this sort of thing that there is a degree of repetition, because we've declared the type of the variable is going to be person, and then we've created a new object of exactly the same type. And time and again, those two will match up. It will be the same type for the variable as the type for the object created. Now, it's not always going to be the case. You'll notice here, actually, there's my person base class, and I've also derived from that an employee, which is a kind of person, and a customer, which is a kind of person, just giving them some various other properties in there. And of course, one situation where you might want to distinguish that is we can say person P equals new, and then let's say have employee, and then employee, we, as well as passing a name, pass in the department. So something like that. And in that case, you would want the two of them to be different. But actually, that's quite a rare thing to do. That sort of thing will only happen more normally, not where you're declaring a local variable, but maybe where you had some kind of function. So we might have a static void sumfunc that took a person. P, doesn't matter much what we do with it. Then if we were to say sumfunc, and in that case, we will be passing the derived class object into the base class reference, but just doing it on a direct local variable is quite a rare thing to do. And so because of this particular oddity, introduced in C# version 3, so this was Visual Studio 2008, we got the var keyword for the implicit variable declaration. So what we can now do is say var p equals new person, and the type of p, we can see by hovering over it, is inferred implicitly from the type of the object that we've initialized it to, so in this case a person. And if we were to change that to, say, a customer, let's just go for the default constructor, save a lot of typing and stuff, then because we've said customer, then we get the fact that it's inferred to be a customer. And that's quite a nice thing to be able to do, saves that duplication. It's somewhat limited in where we can use it, because we can really only use it on local variables. Because if we had this as a parameter to a method, or if we had it as a field within a class, then it wouldn't be able to infer the type because you don't have the initial value there at the time. So in those cases, you still have to do the fully named type. But there is another problem I have with this, particularly on teaching, but also just generally programming. It's that when you start typing this sort of thing, it takes a long time before you actually reveal what type of object you're creating. So we say var, well, we don't know what it is yet. We say P, well, maybe we could take a guess, and if the name was a bit clearer, we might be able to guess it was a person, but it's still not clear. We say equals, we say new, and all the way up to that point, we still haven't got any real idea as to what type it is. It's only if I then type in, let's go for employee, that at that point we know what's going on. And as I say, if I'm trying to teach somebody something, even in an informal way, not just with a lesson, but if it's just, discussing something amongst my colleagues, then it's the case that if you've got to get that far before you know what the type is, it is not clear what's going on. Because C#, like most of the C-style languages, which are strongly typed, type is just about the most important thing we can consider. And therefore, declaring the type up front, saying person P before you make any other decision about what it's going to be, is a really strong way of programming. It means you're focusing on what the type is. Some other languages, although they're strongly typed, do it the other way around. So for example, in Visual Basic, you'd say dim P as new person, or in TypeScript, you'd say let P colon person. And so it would be a bit different. But in C#, we have this strong typing, but if we use var, we don't get to say what the type is until later on in the statement. And so that's why we've got this idea of fit and finish. And so what we can now do is say person P equals new empty round brackets. Simple as that. And because it's obvious we want this to be a new person because we've already declared P to be of type person, just by saying new on its own, that means new person. And so that saved the duplication, but saved it the other way round. So we do declare the type when we're creating the variable, but we don't need to declare the type when we are creating the object. And that means it's useful in all sorts of other situations as well. So for example, now we can have a function that takes a person, and I could here simply say sumfunc new, and again that's perfectly happy. Now whether that's particularly clear code, that's a different matter, but we certainly can see that it's worked out that what you want to have there is a person. If we just run up to that point, then we can see that P definitely is of type person. If we'd wanted to call the constructor, we could have done that, and the compiler will ensure that we only have the appropriate constructors available. So we can see if I just hover over that, we can see we've either got the default constructor or the constructor taking name in there. So the compiler knows exactly what's going on, but it's just saved us that bit of typing. That means another situation we can use it would be if we had a member variable. So it doesn't make much sense on program, but the syntax is okay. So we could say private static person and then just call them owner or something like that. And that means that in main, we could now say owner equals new. And again, we can kind of check it by looking at the overload, so we can see that that is definitely the constructor for person, so it will infer what's going on. Of course, in both of those cases, what is possibly more likely is that you would, although you've got, say, your owner as type person, you would want to put in there one of the derived classes like employee or something like that. So you can still do that, but if you leave it off there, then it's giving us the type that the variable owner is declared for, which is person. Now, of course, when you've got inheritance, actually, it probably makes more sense if your person class is declared as abstract, because we don't want to have just persons. We want to either have customers or employees. And if we look at that now, we can see, as you'd expect, we're getting a syntax error because that's just the same as saying new person, and that's not allowed because it's an abstract class. But once again, we could put in here something like customer, and that would be absolutely fine. However, that's actually kind of removing the ability to do that. So let's just leave that as non-abstract and have a look at a few other things we can do. We can also still use, as well as constructors, so we saw that I could say passing the name in there of Wilma, and that's fine. But we can also use the initializer list. So let's just change this slightly. Let's make this a customer C equals, then say new, and notice the IntelliSense there is being rather too helpful because the whole point of this is we can miss that off and it put it in there, but never mind. But what we could do is then just have their name equals Betty and their credit equals 1000. One thing to notice there though, do make sure that you put those empty round brackets in there to make it clear that's the default constructor call. The reason being, if we missed those off, then that, you can see the error, is a completely different C# structure, which has been around a long time. That is an anonymous object. So there, we're creating on the fly an anonymous object with two properties, name and credit. Whereas here, we are definitely creating a customer, and a customer has a name and a credit. So that's something to watch out for there. So it's not a huge saving, but we can see in all sorts of situations, probably not so much when we've got inheritance actually, but certainly when we've got just repeated types on the left-hand side of the declaration and the right-hand side of the assignment, it can save us some effort. There is one other really nice thing that we get with this though, and this is a problem that's been around since the days of C++, and it's been there in C# for a while, and it's just a bit of a niggle that can catch you out. Let's just go to this program here, which is still in version 8 rather than version 9. And so none of that would work. We wouldn't here be able to say something like person p equals new. There we'll just get an error and it'll basically tell us we should be upgrading to version 9. But something that we've quite often wanted to do looks like this. Let's suppose we had just a console write, and then let's do customer or employee. So what we want the user to do is select C if they want to create a customer object, and E if they want to create an employee object. And then we're going to say string type equals, and then console dot readline, and then let's do a 2 upper on that just to give a little bit of flexibility. And then we're going to have quite a typical sort of statement. We're going to say person p equals, and then type double equals C, and then we're going to use the inline conditional, the ternary operator. So we have question mark new customer colon, so otherwise, we're not really checking for the E there, otherwise new employee. So we're not obviously using the fit and finish here, but it is giving us an error, and if we look at the error, it's again suggesting that we upgrade to C# version 9. And as I say, this is a problem that's been around right back to the days of C++. And the problem is, if we just consider that expression, the compiler has to determine a type for that expression. But how can it tell whether the type of the expression should be customer or should be employee? It's not smart enough to spot there's a base class there, and I think if it did spot that automatically, it will be overkill. Now, in C++ and in C#, the easy way around this would be to cast one or the other of them. So if I were to cast that to a person, now it can use that to determine the type of the entire expression and therefore assign the expression into that p variable. But without that, there is nothing up to and including C#8 that can make that decision, and so we're getting the error again. However, if I take exactly the same code and pop that into our C#9 program, then we can see it's perfectly happy because it can infer the type of the thing on the right based on the type we've already declared on the left, which is essentially all we were doing in those other situations. So when we said customer C equals new, it was inferring the type of the thing on the right based on the type of the declaration on the left. And that's really what's new with all of this. Previously with var, it could infer the type on the left from the object on the right, but now we've got it the other way around as well. And although that's not something you see loads and loads, when you hit it, when you get that problem that we've got in the C#8 version, it really can be quite a confusing one because it looks perfectly logical. Both of those things are derived from person. Why can't we put it into person? Of course, what we still can't do, slightly sadly, we can't just put var in there because now there's nothing on the left-hand side to infer from the right-hand side. So you can use one or other of these, but not both. So that's it. Another small feature of C#9, fit and finish, but I think a really quite nice one. I personally think, it's early days yet, it's only been out a few months, but I think I will be trying to use that approach more than using the keyword var. There are still going to be situations where var is a useful thing to use, but personally I'd rather be saying as soon as possible what the type of my variable is, and let the compiler and the IntelliSense work out the rest from that point. So I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be looking at some more C# 9 features over the next few videos. Do subscribe if you want to hear more about that. Do click on the thumbs up if you like that video, and I'll see you next time.